All right, so by my clock, it is 11 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, or 1 o'clock Eastern Time. So I am going to get started, and we'll move along with our presentation. Welcome everyone to our By Name List and Coordinate Access webinar series. We will be having these webinars and community of practice calls monthly, and we will be addressing various topics and elements associated with by name list and coordinate access. So for all those who, and I'm hoping that the people who are on the line are here for this reason. We did have to make some changes in our times, and so therefore I'm hoping that people are here for the right webinar. If you would make sure that that's why you're here, is for the community of practice call on assertive engagement in a coordinated access system, then you're in the right place. So as I mentioned, we are recording this video, or this community of practice call, but I'm going to stop my video at this point and move on. So as I said, my name is Wally Check. I will be hosting the majority of these webinars and community of practice calls, but the majority of time we will have other people presenting. But today I chose to go ahead and present on this topic for a couple of reasons, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I want to remind people again that we are a multifaceted organization here at the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. We have, as you see, the Training and Technical Assistance Program. We have Built for Zero Canada, and we have the conference that happens every year. Just took place in Edmonton. We had a record crowd of just about 1,600 people at that conference. And then we also have our allied networks. In fact, we just had earlier a webinar that took place for one of the members of the allied networks. That's the National Alliance to End Rural and Remote Homelessness. And they did a webinar by Dr. CoP on the difference between point-in-time counts and prevalence counts, and in particular in the rural and remote areas. So the NAERRH is one of those members of the allied networks. We also have like the Shelter Network. We have lived experience groups and other organizations that are part of that we support in their efforts to move specific areas of ending homelessness forward. The mission of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, again, is that we are working to lead a national movement of individuals, organizations, and communities working together to end homelessness in Canada. And we are grateful for the support of Reaching Home, as we are in part funded by the Government of Canada through the Capacity and Innovation Funding stream of Reaching Home. It's making a lot of the work that we're doing possible. So we're grateful to them and that support. Just wanted to let people know again about our webinar process. When it comes to webinars, which this is not, the purpose of a webinar is mostly to provide information and ideas and best practices, and it'll last about an hour. The content of a webinar, though, is mostly a presenter giving information, and Q&A will only take place if time permits. But the difference here, as I mentioned, is a community of practice call is that there'll be a shorter presentation and more time for discussion and Q&A. I did mention this webinar is being recorded, and the recording of it will be available later on our website for people to review, or for those who didn't get a chance to be here today. So the community practice call for today was again about assertive engagement in our coordinated access systems. And I've chosen to title this, and we actually do a full training on assertive engagement through the training and technical assistance. And this is what we call it there, mindset, skill set, and heart set, supporting people through change. And this is an important concept, whether it be from a program perspective or from a system perspective, as we're talking about today with coordinated access. So just in terms of an agenda, we'll talk about what assertive engagement is. We'll talk a little bit about each of those sets, the mindset, skill set, and the heart set. And then we'll have some discussion and Q&A, and we'll close up the community of practice call. So let's get started. So why assertive engagement? I think we all know that in the work that we do to end homelessness, we are spending a lot of time trying to address the needs of people who are experiencing very challenging and complex situations. And we are often in a position where we can see the changes that participants probably should and need to make, but it's not necessarily the same perspective that those individuals have. And they are often in situations where they're not ready or wanting to make some of these changes. And so it's important that we have an understanding that that's where people are at. But at the same time, we also need to have a belief in our minds that people are willing and able to make change in their lives. And it's up to us to create an environment or help to change the environment that they are in that makes it conducive to change for them. And also understanding that this is not a quick process and this takes time. So it's important to understand that there are some key beliefs and assumptions regarding assertive engagement. Again, people want and need to change to improve their lives. And lives can be changed and professionals can help in that process. Now, there's two others that I want to talk about that are specifically related to change. And that is that change requires processing and decisions. And those decisions are best made in safe therapeutic environments. And most vulnerable people don't live in environments that are safe and therapeutic. So those assumptions are really important in order for us to be able to move forward and help these individuals have that environment or have that situation that allows them to make change. Now, I want to show you a quick video that some of you may have seen this before, either through one of our trainings or have just aware of it through your work. But I think it's a really important concept to set the tone for the rest of the presentation. And it's just a couple minutes long, and I want to share that with you.
One of the most rewarding experiences for me has been to study brain science and apply it to the experience of parenting. And the hand model of the brain that I use to teach parents is very useful to understand that. So if you take your thumb and put it in the middle of your palm, put your fingers over the top, this is a very useful model of the brain. And when we can actually see in front of us what's going on in the brain, then we can change what the brain does. So let me walk you through very basically what happens in this brain and the structures in it. And it goes like this. The spinal cord comes up, representing the wrist, and then you have coming up into the skull, the brain stem and the limbic area, which work together to help regulate arousal and your emotions and the way you have a fight, flight, freeze response. These are below the cortex, the limbic and brainstem areas, and the cortex is this higher part of the brain that allows us to perceive the outside world, to think and reason. And this frontmost part of the brain, right behind your forehead, so the person's oriented like this, is actually the part that regulates the subcortical, limbic, and brainstem areas. This regulation is very important because sometimes We can have all sorts of things happen in our life. We're tired, we're exhausted, someone pushes a particular emotional button, and we can flip our lids. So rather than being tuned in and connected and balanced and flexible, we can lose all of that flexibility, even lose moral reasoning, and act in ways that are terrifying to others, including our children. Now, you can actually bring yourself back online and come back to the high road and make a repair with your child. And that's important to explain to them. And you can also use this hand model of the brain to explain to children, even as young as 5 and 6, how to understand when their emotions are rising up from the brainstem and limbic areas here, and how it's overriding the prefrontal area and making it so they may be about to flip their lids. So I've had kids come tell me that they're about to go flip their lids and they need a break. They need a timeout. And by even just naming that, they can tame it. And that's the power of using the hand model for ourselves and our children to help us all make sense of what goes on in the emotional communication that we have in the course of day-to-day life.
So I show that video, and it's important to understand that even though he's talking about children and parenting and so forth, I show that video to draw you to the idea that many of the individuals and how people get to that place of being dysregulated, where they flip their lid, as he talks about, is by being in a state of a lack of safety or in danger or threat or stress. And I think that we could all agree that many of the individuals that we work with in trying to help them out of their state of homelessness are constantly living in that state where it is about survival, and how they go about from minute to minute getting through different situations. And so what we also know is that when people are in that state for extended periods of time, they can kind of get stuck or locked in that state of having their lid flipped or being dysregulated. And it's not until they get into a situation where they consistently feel safer that that regulation can re-engage, and they are able to start processing and reasoning and making different decisions in their lives. And so he talked about how he, has children as young as 5 and 6 years old who can understand this concept. But we also know that many of the individuals that we're dealing with at the time, whether it's permanent or just temporary because of their situation, are functioning at 5 and 6 year old levels. And so there's no reason at all why this can't be a tool that can be used to actually help them understand why certain things are happening. But I think more so it's important for us as service providers to understand that this is where many of these individuals are. And this is another reason why assertive engagement is an important component to build into your system approaches, because we have to be prepared to work consistently and on an ongoing basis with and on behalf of these individuals. I forgot to mention that if you have questions that come up along the way, please type them in the Q&A section of your panel. And then once we're done, I'll be able to move to those and we'll be able to address those questions. So what is assertive engagement? Well, assertive engagement is really a combination of a few different strategies or models. Initially, we talk about having a strength-based approach to things. It involves motivational interviewing. It involves what's called assertive outreach. And I think sometimes people believe assertive outreach and assertive engagement are the same thing. And in some ways they are, but there's some differences there. And then it also involves the processes and outcomes of your program, which we're not going to get into a ton today, but it's how does your program operate, or how does your system operate? And we will talk a little bit about some policy things to be considering within your system to make sure that assertive engagement is intact. So Ian DeYoung from Org Code talks a lot about assertive engagement as well. And he says that assertive engagement is best understood as the process whereby a worker uses their interpersonal skills and creativity effectively to make the environments and circumstances that their service users are encountered in more conducive to change than they might otherwise be, for at least the duration of the engagement. And then he says, we accept in assertive engagement that we are not operating in a perfect world. We accept that as service providers, it is us that has to change and modify our approach to meet the needs of people we are hoping to engage with, rather than vice versa. As service providers, the onus is on us to provide service in whatever environment that they may be in. So again, he's also talking about the importance of changing the environment to make it more conducive to change for these individuals, and accepting that the environment they're typically in is not going to be that way for them. And so it is a time sensitive thing, but also it's a time unlimited thing, which we'll talk about later. When we talk about assertive engagement, there's really three key areas that the majority of the model is focused on. There's the mindset, which is how we think about people that we work with. And so we talk about the strength-based approach and approaching people as having inherent capability, and then identifying culturally the different strengths that are associated. And there's also the skill set. The skill set is how we work with these individuals. What skills and strategies do we use? So we'll talk about motivational interviewing. We'll talk about culturally responsive and culturally specific tools that have to be in place, and the assertive outreach component of things. And then there's the heart set of assertive engagement, which is really about our attitudes and values and belief system that sort of drive our ability and how we work with people and how we treat these people that are associated with homelessness and the trauma and the other factors that are present. So we have to look at our own biases and judgments and have unconditional positive regard and a belief in these individuals. And then this is where the trauma-informed aspect of our practice comes in. It's really important to be there. So let's talk about each of these a little bit more. So first we have the mindset. And as we talked about with the mindset, this comes with the strength-based practice. So what does it really mean to be strength-based in our practice? And so when we talk about from a coordinated access or system perspective, I want to mention right now that these are things that have to be built in to your system from the beginning. It's a major component, and we talk about different services and resources that have to be available for people as they come through our system and we're making appropriate matches. Having assertive engagement built in, not only in the beginning, which helps us to work with the inflow and identify individuals who are needing supports, but it also helps us through the process once people have been matched to housing and supports and they continue to progress that way. But if we look at the Corporate Leadership Council in 2002, they did a study of over 19,000 employees in 30 different countries around the world. And what they did is they looked at what the difference is between the productivity of their employees based on when they focused on a more sort of punitive or an approach where they addressed people based on consequences for the mistakes that they made. And when they looked at the consequence aspect of things, there was a 26.8% reduction in productivity of employees. But when they looked at focusing on the strengths that were associated with people and on things that they did well and put less emphasis on their mistakes, they saw a 36.4% positive increase in productivity. So what does this have to do with dealing with homelessness? I think that the same factor applies in that if we apply the idea that we focus on the strengths that an individual has and we work hard to find those strengths and to note the positives and the elements of resiliency that these individuals have in their lives, that we will also see change occur much quicker. And we'll also be able to tap in to the areas that will allow that change to happen much quicker. And I think we will see people's self-esteem improve, their ability to make better decisions, and so forth. All of that will change. So when we look at a strength-based approach, what this really means is that we're providing the developmental supports and opportunities or protective factors that promote success rather than eliminating the factors that promote failure. So instead of focusing on the things that these individuals are doing that are maybe exacerbating their problems and challenges in their lives, it's about finding ways as we work with them, even in their difficult and challenging environments, to focus on those things that have actually helped them make it through to be actually where they are. Things that they have done in the past, things that they are currently doing, and things that they identify that they would like to be doing. That's really important in helping people progress. Strength-based practice is an approach to services that recognizes the inherent capability of people to figure out and solve their own problems. The job of the program or of the outreach person or of the service providers is to help them prioritize and solve their own problems, not solve the problems for them. So this is where we as service providers need to remove our expert hats and understand that these individuals are really the best experts in their own lives. And this has to be something that has to be acknowledged, that's important in our systems, and it has to be supported for workers to do, is to allow these individuals to be the experts in their lives and to not be in too big of a hurry to make change, that we try to force that change based on the things that we believe are important, as opposed to focusing on what this individual thinks is important. So let's talk about skill set quickly. This involves the particular skills. The first one I want to talk about is motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is seen as one of the best practices associated with the Housing First model, but it's also very important in working with any population of complex individuals who are facing various challenges. Motivational interviewing was originally designed to work in the field associated with alcohol recovery and then, in addictions, but it's moved on to be appropriate and very helpful in many other circumstances as well. So it's important to understand that MI is a very collaborative, conservative style for strengthening a person's own motivation and commitment to change. So it's a way of helping people listen to themselves talk and be able to make sure that they hear what their own thinking is about, what their own abilities are about, being able to draw attention to areas where there's discrepancy in their values and thinking versus current behaviors, and to be able to spend time looking for that change talk within their words and their actions that suggest that there is a possibility for change here, and help them to understand that. And as you see here, this requires partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation. And evocation meaning that we draw things out in our interactions with individuals. Motivational interviewing is based on or incorporates the stages of change, and I'm sure many of you are very familiar with these stages of change. We have, the pre-contemplation, where they're not really thinking about change at all, and they haven't even identified the need to change. Contemplation is they think that it's important to change, but there's no action being taken. They haven't tried anything yet. Then they could move into preparation, which is they've kind of decided, okay, I better start making some plans here. I better start thinking about steps that I might need to make some of this change. And then of course, action is they actually start acting upon those plans and those goals that they've made. And then they could be in a state of maintenance where they're just continuing to strengthen and build upon what they've accomplished and the changes that they've already been able to make. Within this process, there is the possibility of relapse or of sliding back into previous stages. And we need to be aware that that could happen. And that awareness is also important in assertive engagement so that we can be understanding and continue to be compassionate of their situation. Again, back to what Ian DeYoung from Org Code says about this. He says assertive engagement isn't for all individuals. Primarily, it is designed for work with clients that are in pre-contemplation or contemplation in accordance with the stages of change. So those individuals that are pre-contemplative do not see the damage particular behaviors cause, either to themselves or to wider social groups, and they are unlikely to see the need for change. So using the skills of motivational interviewing and in the process of assertive engagement is definitely something that we would be using and incorporating into our system, and incorporating the capacity in our system to be able to work with those individuals who have not yet chosen to make the change. And so again, that's back to the inflow. Our inflow in coordinated access is not based just on people who are coming forward of their own volition. It is also our responsibility to go out and locate and connect with other individuals. And most of those are going to be in this pre-contemplative or contemplative state. And therefore, it's important for us to utilize these skills in finding a way to help them help themselves move forward. Just a couple of notes again about motivational interviewing. If we look at the motivational interviewing style versus the non-motivational interviewing style, it's important to understand that with collaboration, we see that with motivational interviewing, it's grounded in the view and experiences of the participant. So we build rapport and we facilitate trust and we focus on mutual understanding. Again, you can see this is something that's going to take time. But if we're not using a motivational interviewing approach, then there's confrontation generally. We take the expert role, and that often creates situations where, even if that's not our intention, it appears that we are confronting this individual, that we are taking control, and that it's our perspective that they need to consider. From an evocation perspective, in MI, we're drawing out their thoughts and ideas, their beliefs, the things that they feel are important to them. Whereas in a non-MI style, we're imposing, we're telling them what to do, we're imposing our expertise and our beliefs, and it's less motivating for them in that situation. Think about situations in your own lives where you've had people impose their beliefs, their ideas, their way on you. How willing were you to listen or follow through with that? Maybe you did only because you didn't have a choice, but how well did that stick with you? From an autonomy perspective in MI, we have an understanding that the power for change rests within that individual, and that there are multiple ways that change could be made, that there's not just one way. But in a non-MI style, we generally fall into an authoritative approach, and we come across as the authority, again, as the expert. And this is not very conducive to change, or at least for the desire to change to stick and to be sort of self-accepted and self-determined. Oftentimes, though, it's important to remember that when we approach people using motivational interviewing and assertive engagement skills, we're going to run into resistance, or at least what appears to be resistance. And I say that for a reason, which I'll explain in a moment. but we'll see people show denial or minimization. This is really avoiding responsibility. Um, their language suggests that they're deflecting what's happening and the impact of their behavior. And you might hear somebody say something like that they borrowed something instead of the fact that they actually stole it. Those kinds of things. That's language of denial and minimization. So they, in an effort to avoid the change, they minimize certain circumstances and their behaviors. There's also rationalization and intellectualization. So in these situations, it's common to see some awareness of behavior, but we have to consider the individual who doesn't acknowledge that they consume too much alcohol, but say that they need to drink in order to fall asleep, or someone who distorts things, like they will omit several key facts associated with their behavior in order to defend the current situation that they're in. So this will come about. We'll also see individuals project and displace. This basically means that they blame others and avoid responsibility when they actually did have some control over their behavior. So again, someone who gives them a bottle of alcohol in a situation when they're trying to quit, and they say that, well, this person gave it to me and I didn't want to disappoint them, as opposed to knowing that they actually could have said no, or no thank you, or something like that. And then the last area that people will sort of put up resistance is something called internalization. And this is where the individual tries to often convince you as a worker that they're unworthy of your efforts. And this is often based on shame and the feelings that they have about that they aren't good enough, and so forth. And so I think part of this comes from they have difficulty accepting, actually, that if they get this help and they follow through, what that will mean for them. It's almost like the bar gets raised to a place that they're not sure that they can handle it, and so they fear failure that comes along with that. And they struggle with what this change might mean for them, and their inability to maybe handle it and keep it up. So what needs to occur with this is something called therapeutic limit setting. And this is setting the bounds of the work within a sort of engagement approach. So therapeutic means that we're not looking to exploit the power imbalance between a staff member and a client by the staff member having that level of authority or so forth in their lives. Instead, it means that we're encouraging the workers and the individual we're serving to communicate collaboratively, to have this discussion where they're working together as a partnership. In motivational interviewing, we call it the dancing instead of wrestling. And that's what we do with these individuals in our conversations, is we dance with them and move together in the conversation and work with them to help them identify reasonable limits in their behavior. Sometimes you might even look at what might be some consequences that might be necessary. And sometimes these consequences are natural consequences. Sometimes they're things that the participant you're working with agrees might be important to put in place if some of these behaviors don't change, or if they're struggling with it. But it helps them manage things on their own, rather than always depending on outside help to make that change in their behaviors. So there are some definite foundations to limit setting in a therapeutic environment. Again, it's important. These are things that we've kind of highlighted before, but we have to accept individuals as human beings, treat them with respect and genuine caring or compassion. We have to believe that that person is the one who has ultimate responsibility for their health and well-being. They may not have to be held responsible for things that happened in their past that brought them here, but they have to be responsible for steps that they take going forward. We have to understand that all behavior has motivating factors that may not always be clear and understood. And so we have to take enough time to really be able to understand what those are. We have to realize that some behavior is actually benefiting this individual in some way. That's why it's so difficult for them to let go of it, is because it is seen to be helpful. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. And so it's meeting a need at that point in time. And we have to understand that people aren't always ready to just instantly give up something that has been one of the only things that meets that need for them. And therapeutic limit setting also supports individual self-esteem and self-image during a time where it might be under threat. So these are all important factors to consider when we're helping to set those limits with that individual in that dance that we talked about. So it's important to make sure that they're clear and simple with clear rationale, and that there's a therapeutic or very practical aim or goal at the end of it. It's not about controlling or rules. It's about what is agreed would be the most helpful for this person moving forward. Talked about natural consequences, and also it's important to remember that our efforts are to help these individuals achieve the best amount of independence possible. Again, we don't want to have them totally dependent on others forever, but I think this is where it's important to think about that idea of interdependence. Some people will be able to get to a level of great independence, but interdependence is going to be what's going to really help most of these people move forward. From a motivational interviewing sort of assessment or a fidelity perspective, these are sort of 4 key levels of when motivational interviewing is really effective in your program or in your system. I'd like to just draw your attention to the number 4 area where it says program staff are very familiar with the principles of motivational interviewing, and it is used consistently in daily practice. This is where you want your system to be, where people are using this skill, they understand what it is, and it's happening consistently and daily, and people can identify areas where they've used this skill. This is often not the case when we talk to programs who are trying to use motivational interviewing. And so when it talks about you using it in daily practice, in order for that to happen, it's important to incorporate regular practice for your motivational interviewing. So let's talk about assertive outreach. Assertive outreach is a labor-intensive, everyday service commitment to help support people with their basic survival needs. So what that means is within your system, you have to build in the ability that there are people out there on the street in these difficult environments every day, available and ready to connect with people. It means that it's much more than simply taking the service to the individual. It means engaging in constructive long-term relationships and flexibility in roles and relationships beyond the mere professional. So again, that term, that identifier of long-term relationships, we have to accept that this is going to take time. And in our systems, we have to avoid the pressure that we often give to workers who are doing this type of outreach to make things happen quickly. And we have to allow them the flexibility, and we have to allow the participants we're working with the flexibility and the time that it takes. I will tell you very quickly, I literally just had a conversation yesterday with an Indigenous man that I respect greatly in my home community here in Lethbridge, who was one of these individuals at one time in his life and was heavily involved in alcoholism and drug use and so forth, and has reached a point where he has been clean for a long period of time and and works every day at that. But part of his work is he is now sort of giving back to the community, and he is involved in a lot of this community outreach, assertive outreach, assertive engagement work. And he told me specifically that he says many people, unless you have actually lived it, are not able to see when these folks reach that point where they're ready to truly make a change, and where that small window of opportunity comes about. And so he said that that's why he says it's important that we are there consistently and constantly, and we are making connection regardless of the responses we're getting, because those windows come along very rarely. And he also said there's a difference between when someone is just telling you what you want to hear because they need a roof over their head that night and want a meal, but aren't really ready to make change, versus those other windows that come along where they truly are at a crossroads. And that's what he talked about, is they hit this turning point at different times where they really are ready at that moment. And so we have to be there every day if we can, to be ready to take advantage of those rare opportunities that come about. So that means we're in public places, offering supports and services. We also, with our efforts, have the ability to respond directly and immediately to the things that these people are needing. The success of assertive outreach services is compromised without a dedicated supply of or clear policy and procedures for service users to access affordable housing. So the development of the assertive outreach approach requires a timely access to appropriate, stable, and affordable housing as a necessary and integral component. So what is meant by assertive? It's consistent. It involves harm reduction. It involves prioritizing people who have the more complex issues and challenges at that time. It's an integrated response, meaning it's in partnership with multiple services within the community, and it is not time limited. So the purpose of this kind of an approach is to support the process of engagement, and in doing so, validating the process and the time it takes to establish positive rapport and engagement between the outreach worker and the client relationship. And so all of those elements must be incorporated. We've already talked about these things, and you'll be able to see them on the slide, but I did want to highlight the third bullet. It's a don't take no for an answer approach. Now, that doesn't mean that we are forcing people to do anything. It's just that we understand that when they say no, it's for many other reasons. And one of those is that they're disengaged and they flip their lid and they are operating in survival mode. And we have to understand that we have to continually go back and provide them a sense of safety in order for them to feel like they can trust what's being offered to them. Policy implications related to assertive outreach and assertive engagement. Again, in policy, we have to make sure that these things are in place. Timely access to appropriate housing and services. We have to consider what's the most stable and sustainable housing options for people exiting homelessness, and are they available to us? Timely access to multidisciplinary health services. So other services have to be involved and available in a timely way. And so that's where our formal linkages come from. The provision of ongoing support for those service users who are no longer sleeping rough, but require tailored assistance with managing their particular health needs. The delivery of assertive outreach services by workers in a manner that both maximizes the self-determination of service users and provides continuing and practical assistance to achieve an individual's housing and other goals. And the acknowledgement of the unique nature of the public place dwelling for Indigenous people and the need for a response that's specifically targeting their needs and take into account the local context. And that actually came from some information out of Australia. So quickly on the heart set. Again, assertive outreach is based on an assertive community treatment mentality. It It's designed to meet clients where they're at, both literally and figuratively. It's highly structured, and it's a team model. So it's not just about having different people who are out there in the community doing outreach. It's a structured model to make sure that we are out there continually and consistently and connecting with these individuals using the skills appropriate. Again, a don't take no for an answer approach, and it's a high degree of persistence and creativity by staff in discovering what it is that clients most want and need and what it takes to connect with and motivate them. So again, back to Ian DeYoung, he says assertive engagement is both persistent and active. The persistence is friendly and it can require a tough skin, always being pleasant and professional, even when possibly confronted with colorful language. The active approach to assertive engagement means that it is incumbent upon us to be out in the field, trying new things and new approaches, unwilling to accept that we have tried everything until we have come upon an approach that works. To that end, assertive engagement is a process that frequently takes time, is known to require incremental stages to achieving an end goal, and is most likely going to need to adapt and confront a number of coping strategies presented by the individual. The last thing I want to share with you, one of the last things, and many of you have seen this before. Again, these are some core beliefs for unconditional positive regard that need to be, I think, built into our mindset and our heart set, and should be part of policy and understanding in what we need to do. So I would encourage you to look over these components and rate yourself on where you sit in your acceptance of these. Do you believe these, or do you think that they don't make any sense? But give those some thoughts. And what does assertive engagement look like in practice? Well, from the individual level, you can see, their people are the experts in their own lives, as we've discussed it, and we have to look at our own assumptions and work with people based on the way they see themselves. From a team level, right, intake and assessment forms and the process needs to focus on goals and strengths. And in our case management process, supervision is strength focused and non-punitive. And in case management and supervision, it's a collaborative process between the team and the individuals that we're working with. From an organizational level, the values in our mission have to be based on community needs, and we have to define our services based on the needs of the individuals and the staff that are doing those things, and we have to be transparent and collaborative. And from a systems level, especially in a coordinated access system, our effectiveness has to be measured based on feedback from the participants, as well as some of the quantitative data that we have. So we have to get feedback from staff, we have to get feedback from community, and we have to get feedback from the participants. And those are all important factors. So I'm going to stop there, and I am now going to open it up for some question and answer and discussion. So please, if you do have questions, feel free to type them in. I don't see any at the moment, but I'm going to sort of leave it to you for now and just be quiet for a minute. And if people have questions, feel free to type something in, or even take yourself off mute and you can then ask the question. Feel free if you have a question that you think is silly. My dad used to always say, there's no such thing as a stupid question. And the only one that's stupid is the one you don't ask, he says. So somebody else is likely thinking something similar. So feel free, throw them out there. So I do see in the chat section, Sarah asked the question, how frequently should staff be provided with MI training and supports? That's a great question. Um, I'm actually in the process of putting together some housing first standards, and that will actually go along with supporting our fidelity reviews, as well as supporting um, a housing first accreditation process. And based on those standards, what we're looking at is that motivational interviewing is something that all new staff should have an initial formal training, and then they should at least be have access to a refresher in motivational interviewing at least once a year. There are some very basic things that you can do to get an understanding of motivational interviewing, but it's really important to have a formal training at least once, and then a refresher on an ongoing basis. So I would also say that it's really important that people probably within 6 to 8 months of being hired should have access to some exposure to motivational interviewing, but definitely within the first year of being hired, they should be able to have access to a training. Thanks for that question, Sarah. Any other comments or thoughts, questions that people might have? I will say, as I wait here for a minute, again, I don't think I can highlight any more the importance of how, we often run into situations where programs or systems are kind of wanting to discharge individuals or step away from individuals because of a lack of engagement. And if we go back to the very beginning when we talked about how it's necessary for us as service providers to change the environment. Well, that environment isn't going to change unless we show these people that we are willing to be there unconditionally. So we talked about unconditional positive regard. That also involves our relentless efforts to connect with these people, regardless of the way they respond to us, regardless of how many times they say no. Because I think it's important to understand that none of these individuals reached a point in their lives where they said, I think that this is the kind of life I want to have. So somewhere underneath, there was that desire and wanting to have a good life. And although life and their environment may have created a situation where that fire was doused, I believe there's always an ember that's still alive. And so by our efforts at changing the environment, at continually connecting and re-engaging, we help to change that environment. We help to change the message that they've received all along, in effort to help to fan that ember that eventually will catch fire a little bit. And that's when that person will move from that pre-contemplative and contemplative stage more to more into the action stages of wanting to make change. So if we stop engaging, and we don't utilize the skills necessary in that engagement, we won't create that environment of compassion and acceptance that these people need in order to start to feel safe, to have that prefrontal cortex re-engage and to reason through the changes that they need to make. Any other comments or questions? Kelly Herb has asked, does the Canadian Alliance offer any train the trainer opportunities for MI? That is also a really good question, Kelly. The challenge with train the trainer in motivational interviewing is that staff turnover generally poses a problem. and I'll be honest with you, staff turnover makes it challenging for any kind of training because it gets costly to continue to have the training. At this point in time, we do offer an MI training, but we do not offer a train the trainer on that area. Again, MI is something that the training, being a trainer in it, often requires some additional skill levels and things like that. But we're not at a point right now where we do a train the trainer in that area. I certainly think it's something worth pursuing, and we have talked about it. And I'm currently in the process of having discussions with people about how that might potentially look and take place. But what I will tell you is that the MI training that we do through the Canadian Alliance, we call it MI on the fly, actually. And the reason we call it that is because we've seen many motivational interview trainings be situations where people go and they get some good information, but then they walk away feeling like they're not sure how this necessarily applied to them and the work that they do in homelessness, because it doesn't necessarily seem to fit. It feels like it's something that you do in an office setting or a clinical setting. What we try to do with our MI training is incorporate examples and anecdotes about how MI plays out in the area of addressing homelessness, as well as we try to also build in examples and practices in how to do motivational interviewing with people who are experiencing some cognitive or developmental delays and challenges. That training is typically a two-day training. But we will let folks know if and when we get to a place where we can do a train the trainer for that. Thanks for that question, Kelly. We've got about 5 minutes left here. If there are any other comments or questions, people just want to throw something out for discussion, thoughts. Well, with that being said, again, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on the Canadian Alliance Training and Technical Assistance website. You can just go to that at www.training.caeh.ca, and you'll see a link at the top of the page that says webinars, and from there you'll be able to access the webinar archives. And you'll be able to see this as well as multiple other webinars or community of practice calls that we have done, and view them as often as you like. Again, the PDF version of these slides will also be available through that archive page, so that you can download those and use them however you choose. And also you will see what we have coming up for webinars. So I will tell you right now, I forgot to put a slide on here for it, but the next actual webinar regarding coordinated access and by name lists is on December 20th. It will be Ian DeYoung who will be providing us with information, some other information about coordinated access and by name lists, and yeah, it'd be a great webinar to attend. So you can also go on that page on our website and register for that. And then we will also have on the 17th, we have a Housing First community of practice call coming up, where we will be talking about actually about choice again in Housing First, which is interesting because choice and assertive engagement also kind of connect to each other, because we oftentimes think that because we offer choice from a Housing First philosophical perspective, that when people tell us that they don't want us to help them or to come around, that's when we say, well, they're not wanting to engage, and so we discharge. And that's not really, I mean, yes, that is choice, but that's not really what assertive engagement is about. We don't take no for an answer, remember? So that will come up again when we talk about choice in that community of practice call. So thanks everybody for joining. Appreciate your attendance, and feel free to get a hold of me by email or phone if you have other questions that you'd like to have answered or to talk about. In the meantime, have a great day, have a great rest of your week, and for those that I don't have contact with before, have a great holiday season, and yeah, enjoy and be careful out there. Take care, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.